Welcome to Psychology of Pilgrimage. In this episode, I am joined by Aurore Decamps-Ronsin, who is a French battlefield pilgrimage guide and currently doing PhD work at the University of Lille. Hi, Aurore. It's so nice to see you in person virtually and to be able to talk to you about a topic that is really close to both of us. We are both quite inspired by the topic of remembrance and battlefield pilgrimages, and this episode will be released on Remembrance Day, Veterans Day in the United States. And you are a perfect person to be speaking to about this because you have many years, over a decade, nearly 2 decades of experience as a battlefield guide to military cemeteries and to battlefields in northern France. And thank you for taking the time to speak with me about your experience.
Thank you very much. Happy to see you at least.
Yes, I know we can sort of discuss these topics through email or messaging, but it's completely different when we can see one another face to face or face side to side is really how it looks on the screen rather than facing face to face. The first question I have for you is, how did you become interested in being a battlefield guide?
As for professional reason, I explain. In fact, I've been starting my career in the south of France, and there I was touring about different purposes. But when I decided to move back to my native region, I quickly understood that if I wouldn't tour that battlefield, I wouldn't work, because here in the northern France, I would say that something like 80% of tourism is made on battlefields places. And so at the beginning, in fact, I was forced to do that. And so you see, when I started doing this, I thought it was a purpose among the other. But by meeting people, I quickly understood that it was not the case. It was something really different, really particular, in which you have a very sensitive relationship with people. It could be very emotional. And at least you don't do that as other tours. And it is amazing to see how useful you could be sometime for people, and how interesting are the experiences people telling you about their relatives, or sometimes the things you do, because maybe we will have the occasion to talk a bit about that later. But I have been doing some crazy things on battlefields to pay tribute to this soldier fallen in the Western Front. And so, yes, something that was at the origin a job turned to be a way of life. But maybe we will have another moment to talk about this idea of way of life later.
So you've said some interesting pieces already here. I did not realize that 80% of the tourism sector in northern France is focused on battlefield tourism. That's a significant impact, and also a significant sector of the tourism industry and significant to the economy of northern France.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
these,
In fact,
yeah, please.
oh, sorry. Well, it's not so visible as what you can find, for example, in Normandy, or what you have in Belgium. You probably, sorry, you probably have been to Ypres, where
Hmm.
you have something like 10 sites per square kilometers. Here in the northern France, it's a bit discreet, but if you look deeply, you quickly, well, first of all, when you look at the maps, at the battlefield maps for World War One, you quickly see that the trenches were occupying about 4,500 kilometers, including first, second, third line, of course. But it had a really big impact. It is hectares and hectares of lands that were impacted by that. And here, the majority of cities running from Dunkirk and going to the Somme and over the Somme have a link with the remembrance of the Great War and of World War II too, because the battlefields are about the same. Even if for World War II it is a bit different, but it is. And of course, Normandy and for French, the Verdun area are really visible. But when you make an addition of all sites, it's definitely bigger than everywhere in France. And the region here have a big ambition is that making a communication upon tourism based on remembrance and on battlefields.
It makes sense, and I think it follows a trend across Europe in particular that the trend focused on cultural heritage routes and pilgrimages. So this seems to fit very nicely within the broader agenda across the EU with this focus on cultural heritage. Um, in fact, my first encounter with the battlefields of northern France was outside of Calais, 20 some years ago. That's where I first encountered the battlefields. And it was, I think, more as a tourist. I was coming across the channel from England and then going out and looking at at some of the battlefields. And I don't know that I connected with that as much as I then later have done with the World War I sites. But I can see how they're all related and why so many people, particularly over the last, I think post COVID-19, the post pandemic, are wanting to connect with their family heritage and history from both world wars and maybe even before that. So you started you moved from the south of France back to your home area in northern France with the intention of being a tour guide, maybe not so much focused on these personal pilgrimage type tours. And then you encountered people coming from, were they British, Australian, American? How did you first encounter this very personal connection to the battlefields?
Well, by moving into this region, uh, that is my native region, changed a lot of things in my vision of tourism. Because before that, I was working in the south of France, so around Marseille, Toulon, Monaco, where tourism is an industry. Here, and especially with pilgrimages, it's a craft. It's really crafty because you don't, well, I have been touring with buses full of British people. Of course, I did that, but I enter in this purpose through individual pilgrimages. So I was meeting couples, or sometimes a family of 4 or 5 people, but never more. And when I was working in Sacred Ground Tours Company, we had a minibus in which we could welcome about 9 persons. So it's really, you are really close, definitely closer than when you have a bus with 50 people. And the idea of experience comes to this first, because as people are not so much, you can talk with them and they can tell you about their history. Because by doing this pilgrimage, of course, they want to pay tribute to the soldier laid on the soil in a cemetery, etc. But this pilgrimages talks about individual people too. Once I met a guy who insists a lot to go to a cemetery that was in the middle of nowhere, and he had a plane to take some 2 hours then, so we had to rush. And so we start something like 5 o'clock in the morning. So it was completely crazy. And when I drove him there, the guy said, "Okay, the cemetery is here." It was really tiny, something like 10 graves. And so it was easy for him to find the grave he was looking for. And he said, like, leave me. I want to go there alone. And I was just by the car, so I was hearing everything. And the guy talked to his ancestor, and he told him about all his life. So he talks about experiences. And through the pilgrimages, what is important is this individual experience you do, because you do the pilgrimage for yourself. Of course, it's important to say thank you, to say, I'm here because you give your life. But it talks about individual walks. You see what I mean? People, it's probably a way to make a sort of statement of our proper life, and this is a dimension we never consider in pilgrimages because we see well the big things going to the main gate and being 3,000 people making a sort of huge communion. Of course, it's important, but you have individual experiences behind, and this is really really interesting, and it gives you what I told you just before. It transforms the way you do. You're not just doing tourism. You help people to find themselves, and probably it's a bit ambitious to tell it like that, but um it gives a sense to this that is deeper than just touring and say, wow, it's beautiful, cemeteries are very well maintained. No, no, it's definitely more than that.
That's so beautifully said. That's definitely been my experience also, going on accompanying people on pilgrimages and also speaking to people who have been on these battlefield pilgrimages. And I think what you're talking about, what I'm hearing is that this is an intimate experience, that the groups may be very small, it could be one family, it may be one individual, and you as the guide are becoming a part of this family or a part of this experience in a way that is quite personal, and probably feels like you're a part of the family, that you're another family member. The information that you're bringing to the people, to these pilgrims who are coming, it plays a really critical role in their experience. They're wanting to have to learn more about the family member and maybe learn about the battle in which they died. And so I think the role of the guide is so crucial in many ways because you're the connector, bringing the pilgrim and the soldier together and creating, kind of fusing this experience that is quite personal and intimate. Uh, what do you Are you able to recall the first time that you were part of one of these pilgrimages and what that was like? How you really knew that what you were doing was very different than the type of tourism or large group tours that you had experienced up to this point?
Well, I wouldn't say exactly the first time, but because, well, at the beginning, you were very, very stressed about to be sure to give the right information in the right
Mm,
moment, and so, well, on the first days, I was not so on my ease, but my first battlefield place was Fromelles. I don't know if you know about Fromelles.
I do.
French people. Oh, you do great. Because when I started touring in Fromelles, it was the moment when the Musgrave were just discovered. So just to situate people that are listening or watching us in hello, um, Fromelles started around 2008, and there two one British and one Australian historian found a Musgrave in which there were 205 soldiers, lost soldiers. The majority of them were were Australian, and there were a couple of British in the grave. And it has been something absolutely exceptional in the Remembrance world because it was the first time that they had, but we, because we were in the same history, but it was, yes, the first time we had the opportunity to make some archaeological researches about the war. And moreover, as Australia gave a lot of money, the specialists were able to make some autopsies and some researches. So they saw live what was an injury from the Great War, what a shell could do, what a shell shock,
Mm.
what are
Mhm.
what were the consequences of a shell shock. And it was such an enormous thing that and so spectacular that Commonwealth Progress Commission with Australian government decided to make a cemetery. And so it was exceptional for the graves, for the most graves. It was exceptional for the autopsies. It was exceptional for the different elements we found because they found letters, books, matches, shoes, very, very well preserved. And about the fact that the Commonwealth Photograph Commission made a cemetery. The city of Fromelles gave a place, and the cemetery was created. And it looks like others. And I have been starting touring with this. And so,
Wow,
well,
that's time to come
at the
into
beginning,
this.
wow, wow, because well, you start to explain things, and suddenly you have people behind you. Because on that time I was working for the little tourist office, and I had a minibus, and some people behind you saying, "My great grandfather was there, and he must be one of the unknown soldiers. So probably I will come back for the devoiling ceremony of the cemetery, as it could be one of those." And what we didn't know when I started is that Commonwealth Progress Commission made some DNA researches. And when this appears, I was used to say to my tourists that if we would be lucky, about 2% of them would be known. We were completely wrong. It was the official figures gave by the Commonwealth Progress Commission, and we were completely wrong because at least they have been identifying about 185 soldiers.
Wow.
That is definitely much more than 1%.
Yes.
And so um, these people coming from the other part of the world have to come back because every years we had some unveiling of graves made through DNAs, and some people went back and said, "Wow, we at least found him. We have been searching him for ages, and now he's laid here. So the minimum we can do is coming back and paying tribute to him." And so when you start with such an experience, when you start by driving a minibus, talking with people you don't know, and every days we have changing, and finally a year later there was a huge ceremony. I never saw any Commonwealth Progress ceremony, but I had the feeling when I was there, I had the feeling that for 2 hours this tiny village was the center of the world, and the rest of the world stopped turning. You see, there was Prince Charles and Lady Camilla. My grandmother, we will talk about her later, but my grandmother was bearing her flag on the just by them. I was in the big parade, and suddenly during the ceremony, families start to read the last letters of the soldiers, and suddenly you understand how huge it is, and you start crying because the guys, the living in the voices of their descendants were laid on the soil, and it was such an amazing thing. How would you consider this as a job? No, it turns to something different, definitely. And talking about myself, it might me because I start with Fromelles, but quickly I wanted to understand why the Australians were there, because as a French, I never heard about that before. No French. There's not a lot of French now. It's better, but in the year 2000, not a lot of French knew the fact that Australian, British, American came in the northern France. And if some of them would have known, they would have found it normal because we live with nearby the cemeteries, and so it's normal to have a Canadian cemetery just by your place.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to understand. And so from Fromelles, I understood that Fromelles was a diversion for the Battle of the Somme. So I started to study the Battle of the Somme, and what a battle, and what a horrible
Mm.
battle.
Mm,
And so,
yes.
but to understand what happened in the Somme, you have to understand what happened in Ypres, and so on, you see. And through that, I make a link with my own history, because my grandmother always told me about the fact that her father was a Portuguese soldier coming during World War One, fighting the German, and then staying in France and married a French lady. And you see, to me, this history was absolutely normal. I was, in a way, sure that a majority of French had the same history. And by studying and meeting people, I understood how exotic this was. And this is how I made my own work and I changed my point of view. And well, you see, well, it turns to be a sort of, would you say sacerdotal things? Like priest, you see the mission, a kind
Yes.
of, it's not divine mission, it's not religious, but suddenly you understand why you get up in the morning.
I maybe in English we would say it feels like a calling, like it's a sacred
Yeah,
calling.
that's,
Is that does
yeah,
that
that's,
is that the what you mean?
yeah,
Yes, I've heard a lot of people say
yes,
this, who are particularly the battlefield guides uh, who are uh, traveling with families. That there is something, it feels like a bigger type of calling or vocation rather than simply a job. So I can definitely see why you would have that sense. And how remarkable then to find your own story in the midst of this bigger World War I story. You talked about how you started learning in order to understand Fromelles, you had to learn about the psalm, and it sort of just keeps growing and growing. And I think that's one of the beautiful aspects of learning about the pilgrimages, because through these family portals, we see the connection between our family and another family, but also we see the family connections set against larger global events that suddenly makes sense. We understand the world in a more comprehensive way through these small pathways of a family pilgrimage, either into our own family pilgrimage. Oh, we have a little cat pilgrim, our own
yeah.
family pilgrimage, or then in sort of the larger uh, kind of national views as well. Um, you have led pilgrimages for many different groups of people, and I'm very, very curious about some of the differences or some of the practices that characterize Australian pilgrimages, or British pilgrimages, or American pilgrimages, or now we have this addition of Portuguese pilgrimages, or even French pilgrimages, people coming who may live in the area, who may be reconnecting with their family histories. What are some of the practices that you see consistently across these groups of pilgrims?
I would say that, well, talking about, well, let's talk about each nationalities. Um, the, well, my first pilgrims were Australian because I have been working in an Australian company till COVID. So we were receiving about 4,000 Australian visitors a year. And so Australian people were always very enthusiastic, for example, about, well, they were, their focus was on the battlefields and they were very enthusiastic to go there. But for them, it was also an occasion to discover France and how greeny could be northern France. And this is funny because northern France is like England. It rains, well, a day when it doesn't rain, we say it's nice weather. And Australian people were used to tell me, "Wow, how lucky you have! It rains every day. It's so greeny, and everything is so beautiful, and villages are so tiny." So there was some kind of, yes, enthusiastic things, and in the same time, they were very, very aware about what happened Australian people knows exactly what they want to say, the places where they are. Even if you explain them things, they knows. They have been reading a lot, preparing their travel for sometime years before coming. So when you tell them, you talk with specialists. They knows where the trenches were, what happened in a place, where the jacket jumped out the trench and things like that, where he won his medal and things like that. And so in a way, it makes it easy because you don't have to explain the basis, and so you can go deeper.
Mhm.
And you can find this too with the British people that are also very, very um, cultivated about the Great War, and this for them could comes from the education they've been receiving, because in Great Britain, you start to learn about the Great War when you were at the primary school, and at the minimum once in your life, you have to come to the Milan Gate. And so it's something really cultural, and they have a big overview of the war that they are most of the time looking for something more individual. Of course, Australian too, but it's a different way to see that. That is to say that Australians wants to see the landscapes and things around. For the British, they knows the land, and what they want to say is the exact place where people fallen. You see, and as a little story once, I have a British couple whom lost their great uncle in the Battle of Loos. So it's the battle where Rudyard Kipling lost his son
Mhm.
too, and they were wanted to go on the place where the soldier died, and this place was completely different now because it was the center of a mall, and I had to go there with the maps, and we parked in front of the McDonald's, and the line was crossing the McDonald's, and we've been walking there. It was completely surrealistic because it was a Saturday afternoon on Cuba, and among that there were two British and a guide walking around with people looking at them and looking the map, saying, "Well, the electricity line is here, so we are exactly on the right place." And they've been walking to the grass, picking up some land and going back with it. So it was, yes, something pretty different because it it have this. It's not just an overview; it's something really precise. So this is for the main difference. Even if in both cases people wants to experiment the
Mhm.
thing, it's a cathartic thing. And
Yes.
well, for American, um, it's pretty not well known that America joined the war, and in fact, Americans joined the war 5 minutes before the end. That's true.
Mhm.
For the reason we know, it was a question of money. It was a question of to be sure that France win the war to be able to pay back the money. And well, there were the problem of blockers and things like that. But uh, in the majority of people I met, they had a World War II vision of World War One, and so the experience is completely different because the cemeteries look like the same as in the US.
Mhm.
So there's a kind of proudness, and when you enter into an American cemetery like the one you have in the Somme, you are in an American territory. So this is kind of anecdote, but you go back home so far away that you go back home. And it was always, they were always very enthusiastic to learn more about their story, but with, well, I would say not such a deeper knowledge that I would have found in British or in Australian. I don't know if you see what I mean. It was something really large, but I don't know how World War One is taught in the US.
It's
And
it it's not taught, at any level of depth, and so it's not surprising to hear you say that when Americans are coming, they may have an awareness of World War II, and both of the wars are merged together. Also, it I don't know if this is your experience, but I would imagine that the people who are that you would have encountered as a guide are ones that may have a family connection to World War One, or they may be military members who are interested. They may be stationed in Europe and they want to visit battlefields, or they may be a
Right.
member of that same military unit, and so they're coming to the battlefield as part of uh, a learning opportunity to learn more about the history and heritage of their military unit.
Yes, it's more like this to increase their knowledge. And moreover, the way to be received in an American cemetery is definitely different than in Commonwealth cemeteries, because when you go to an American cemetery, it's better. You can go without booking, but it's better to book, and they knows exactly about the timing you arrive. And so they place the American anthem when you arrive. They gives you the flag, the things to. It's in a way, and it's not a negative point of view, but it's like a show. You see, they give you a all-in-one experience, and but well, it's something I would say lighter in the experience. But you explain exactly why. Because it's really large and you had wars in your country. World War II covered the experience of World War One. And in this point, I would say that the American people would join the French. Because for the French, the knowledge about the Great War is not as big as we would expect, because we have the reputation to be a country with a lot of culture. That's true. That's true. Then about the wars, and especially about World War One, and I would say wars in general, a lot of French, not the majority, but a lot of them have a general view, a kind of overview. Because when we are at school, we are not taught in details, because we would spend a year per war to do that.
Mhm,
So you see, for example, World War One, it's just 4 hours when you are in the high school. And when you go to the lycée, you have another 2 hours, but it's short.
mhm,
Um, and the program spend much more time on World War Two, because we have a necessity of remembrance with the genocide and things like that. But you see, we had so many wars that everything is concentrated. And moreover, for French, it was decided just after World War One, so in the 20s, to concentrate the remembrance of French in Verdun. And this made create the idea that the French were just involved in Verdun. That's not
mhm,
true. There were French people from Belgium to the Switzerland border. But we had the vision of the Battle of the Marne, of Verdun, sometime California area that is in the Somme, Southern Somme. But well, that's pretty old hole. A lot of people don't know that we had hospital by the sea, that there were big campaigns offensive and things like that. And so yes, for French, big when they comes, they are not especially looking for a grave, a specific grave, because this is sad, but the majority of French people who lost someone in the Great War don't know exactly where the person is buried. What they want is to make an experience about what was the war, and how beautiful could be the sights, and what is the way to understand what we had. But for French, they have a wealth other countries don't have, is we have the cemeteries in the place we live. So you can go on tours and experiment the battlefield, and then searching by your own to pay tribute privately to your great uncle or to your great grandfather, or well. So it's yes, a different way to see the things. To go ahead and follow your question, Canadians now. So for Canadians, they are very focused on the places where they fell. That is to say that they want to have an overview about the war, but they want to go in their places. And this is completely understandable because as a French, if I would go to Vietnam, I would like to see mainly the places where the French were. I'm happy to see the American places, but I'm pretty much more concerned by French, you see. And so with Canadian, we had the necessity of efficiency. Efficiency. You you give them the bases and then you go straight to places, you see. And when they goes to the cemetery, it's sober. They goes, they stay a minute, and that's it. We can go ahead, even if it's a great uncle, someone close. But the experience is, I would say, more retreat. You see, it's more inside them. Definitely less expensive than what you can have with Australian people who did some things amazing for the remembrance. It's yes, really different. I think that's it. Oh yes, we haven't been talking about Portuguese. So for Portuguese, well, Portuguese have also an individual point of view that is linked with the fact that in France we have less than 2,000 graves. That is to say that the majority of the Portuguese contingent went back to Portugal. But people who wants to go to the Richebourg cemetery, that is the unique Portuguese cemeteries, knows exactly what they want and they knows the place to go. And then they give their tribute, but they already studying before. And when they comes there, it's not because they lost themselves. They know exactly where to go. And they are in contact with the French community of Portuguese. And so all the researches and things are made before. And so it's a way to set the famous saudade. Saudade is the idea of a sort of happy melancholy, you see, is that as you have all elements, you can focus on your feelings on the place. So it's, yeah, a different way to see things.
Are the Portuguese graves mainly in one cemetery, or are there several cemeteries that contain Portuguese graves?
In fact, we have one big cemetery that is in Richebourg, in which you have 1,833 graves. In fact, it's a concentration cemetery. So a lot of graves come, a lot of soldiers who were buried in close Belgium or by the Somme or areas like that were grouped in between the 20s and the 30s in this cemetery. That we have a sort of addenda in Boulogne. In Boulogne, you have, I think it is 40 or 42, I think it's 42 around. And you have another tiny cemetery in Ghent, in Belgium.
Mhm.
And now, as searchers, we know that there are a couple of Portuguese that were buried by mistake in German cemeteries. But today it's unthinkable to make them moving, so they stays in the place they are. So yes, the concentration is made on the Richebourg cemetery, so that in Richebourg you have the cemetery, but you have also the place to pay tribute with a monument, and you see you have everything is grouped in the same place, and you have a little chapel in front of it. Sorry. So if you want to pray, well, everything is in the same place. So for Portuguese, yes, the focus is on these places. And moreover, about pilgrimages, there is something important that no one else have, is the Christ, we call it in French, le Christ des tranchées, trenches Christ. I don't know if you heard about this story,
No.
but this is something this is something very particular from Portugal. In fact, the Portuguese felt in an area around Richebourg with Nova-Chapelle, etc. So the south of Armentia. And where the Portuguese were based, there was a cavalry. And this cavalry was destroyed, not by the German, but by the British. And the Portuguese, when they arrived on the place, they found a broken Christ. The Christ was, well, pretty well. He just has lost his legs and a arm, but still the the original figure. And so the Portuguese adopt this Christ, and every places they were moving, they were carrying the Christ with them. And when the big, horrible Portuguese battle happened in April 9th, 1918, the Portuguese were forced to abandon the Christ on the trenches because, well, they had the choice between their life and the Christ, so they abandoned the Christ. And after the war, the Christ was found and set in his original place. And in the 50s, a Portuguese consul in France, Mr. Louis Antoine, negotiate with Portugal for this Christ to be offered to Portugal. And this Christ was settled in the place where the unknown Portuguese soldier was, that is to say, in Bilateral monastery. And so this was really symbolic because this object suddenly turned to be the concentration of all deaf people in the northern France. And so, of course, people goes to Richebourg, but as British people would go to Ypres, Portuguese people goes at that hour and a half driving south of Porto to go to the Battalion Monastery because this Christ is the embodiment of the losses. So, in a way, they have a double level of pilgrimages, but by going, paying tribute to the unknown soldier and seeing the Christ of the trenches, they start to make a part of the pilgrimage. And this makes the other one in the lands some, I wouldn't say accessory, but you see, secondary. You do it when you have time, but you already pay tribute in battalion. So it's, yeah, a bit different in the way.
That that's it's amazing that this account is amazing because it really does highlight the pilgrimage aspect and the connection between the war, the soldiers of the war, and this place where the Christ has now been placed, and the new pilgrimages that are occurring there. Do you know what types of practices are occurring at this at the monastery with this Christ? Do people leave objects? Are they praying for something in particular? How do they interact with the site?
Well, you can't drop things there because the Christ is permanently guarded by two militaries. And
Okay.
every 2 hours, you have a changing. So when you enter the place, it's really secret. You can't speak, and you can't go close because you have this protection. And so it makes it really sacred. And but you have the feeling, the view. You breathe the same air as those who gave their life,
Hmm.
but you stay behind. You see, it's like adoring a relic, and it is a relic of the war. So it gives another sacred dimension to the way. And you say for Portuguese, they have photos at home, and so they made the link, and probably the fact that they can't access, they can't touch, they can't leave things, make them thinking how sacred is the place, sacred as something religious in that point, and in the same time, how respectful they had to be about that. And so they have their personal monument at home with the photo, and you have this huge idea of memorial and of remembrance that is embodied in the unknown soldier of Battalion. So yes, it's pretty in reserve. Uh, so it's not, I would say, as spectacular as what you would have with the British, with the Australian, with living flags or offering flowers. Well, it's something more psychological, I would say.
Hmm. Do 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 children in Portugal learn about this? I mean, is there kind of a national consciousness of this relic, or or is it kind of more niche where people who may know about World War One or who may be interested in religious shrines and relics, they learn about it, or is it sort of broadly everyone knows about it?
Uh, I have the feeling that it is something more adult, I would say, that children. So, of course, now children are taught at school. But for ages, it was not the case. I mean, in my parents' generation, my parents are French. We've been living in France, etc. We are French, but I have a lot of Portuguese friends, and from my parents' age, and they are used to say that when they were at school as pupil, they were not taught about that, and it is clearly comprehensive because on that time, that is to say before 1974, you have a big dictator in Portugal with
Mhm.
Salazar, and Salazar made a kind of storytelling about history of Portugal, focus on the great discovering, and so a lot of Portuguese were never taught about the fact that Portuguese took part to the Great War.
Mhm.
And this is more visible when you see that Portugal was physically present in the Treaty of Versailles signatures, but even if they were belligerent, they had no right. They didn't have anything from the Treaty of Versailles, on the difference of Spain, who was neutral and signed the treaty. So the Portuguese position is quite bizarre, you see. And so it was not so much doubt that from the years 2014, 2018, sorry, I'm speaking too fast. 40, Aristotle, 2014, 2018, there was a kind of conscience that suddenly woke up, and you had films, you had books, you had a couple of things. So this is why I would say that it is an adult affair. I do hope that now pupils are taught at school, but
Mhm.
I'm not sure. I don't know.
It seems like it would be important for descendants like yourself of Portuguese soldiers to make a pilgrimage to this place, because it's also reinforcing your Portuguese identity. You're French, your family has been in France and are French for several generations, but you do have this Portuguese ancestor, and it seems like it would be very special to travel to this trench Christ to be able to form a connection also with with your own ancestors.
So for me, it's a pilgrimage I try to make every year, in very, very specific conditions. Because, well, I'm gonna show you something. It's just here. I didn't plan to show you that, but I think it could be seen.
Yes.
This is my grandma, just here with my son when he was young. Now he's 18, but this is my grandma, and this
Can
is
you
the
back yeah,
flag.
can you pull the photo back a little bit towards you? Yes. Okay, perfect. It's perfect to see it back.
And this flag is really important for my family and for the Portuguese remembrance because, well, I put the photo here because it's the flag of the Liga dos Combatentes, that is the Veterans Association in Portugal. And in fact, my great grandfather, sorry, create what we call a nucleo, that is to say, an outside association outside from Portugal, and he created in France. So he was the first to create a kind of agency of this association out of Portugal. It was 1924. And Portugal Veterans Association gave to the association a flag. And this one is number 2, because my great grandfather bared the flag for ages. And when he died, my grandmother was asked to bear the flag, so that she has been the first flag bearer in France. It was 74. So it was not easy for a female to be a flag bearer on that time, and especially as she had never made any wars. She was not a veteran. And but she felt to maintain this remembrance as a heritage from her father. And we have, well, the flag was really destroyed because it was really old. So we changed it in the year 2020. And when she passed away some 2 years ago, with my mom, we decided to go ahead in this mission. And so every year in April, I put the flag in my suitcase, and together we goes to Battalion Memorial for April the 9th. So in Portugal, April the 9th is really important. It's not a public day, but it's a day dedicated to the Battle of the Lys, so the battle in which Portuguese were involved. And on this day, you have a special TV emission that started around, I think it's 10 in the morning, with the big ceremony, the religious ceremony in the Battalion Memorial. And it goes ahead for 4 hours because just after you have another ceremony, and it finishes with the tribute to the Christ of Trenches. And every time I go there, it is really impressive because you have thousands of people outside the church. You have thousands of people inside the church. I stand in just by the altar, so it's a very important place because as I am the only French, and as I go with every year we go with mayors of cities involved in the war, in the Portuguese involvement. So we have a very specific spot, and it is impressive to be there as you are facing the president of Portugal. That is only, well, I'm facing him, and it's, well, amazing every year. And after that, so you have the big ceremony in which medals are given, you have cannons, you have plenty of things like that. And we finishes the ceremony with by entering the flag, my our flag, in the place where the Christ of Trenches is. And every year it's, wow, a sort of huge mission that is given years after years. It's a big responsibility, and well, it's really emotional. So I have a different way to live the remembrance and to pay tribute, so that we do this in a week, and the week after, Portuguese authorities come in France to make about the same ceremony but without the mass in the Portuguese cemetery. So it's some kind of week of remembrance that is really, really important for me, for the mayors, for the Council of Portugal, Mr. Cavaco, that you were in touch with. Well, and so, yes, it's something, it's a week per year dedicated to remembrance. So it's really important for me.
Thank you for sharing. I had no idea about this important element of remembrance for World War One, but then also how it is an ongoing connection for descendants of Portuguese soldiers to travel to Portugal, and then this bilateral situation where then there's a week-long remembrance that continues in France. I want to learn more about that. So I'll be doing more reading, and maybe we'll have more conversations about it. You've talked beautifully about British pilgrims and Australian pilgrims and Canadians and French and Americans and Portuguese. Do you have any experience with German pilgrims who are coming to France? I mean, this is a question that is often looming for me around how Germans currently may be interacting with cemeteries or the battlefields.
Germans are very discreet, in fact. The way they pay tribute is completely different, and it's completely understandable that because when you meet them, first of things they do after talking a bit about weather and polite things, saying we are sorry. So they start with apologize, and it's always difficult to be the bad cop in the story. And in history, when you lost two wars, it's it must be horrible for them because their soldiers were war victim too, but on the wrong side. And as we know, history is always written by winners. And so I think for, well, years they wouldn't come. And this turned to be cultural because just after the war, it was not, well, I wouldn't say that it was forbidden, but it was not very well seen to come on pilgrimages. It started to very, very slowly in the 80s. And in the years 2000, families renting French cars start to come. And well, when I was touring around 2010, I heard some German sounds, but they were always very discreet, staying by side. You see, well, it's difficult position. Nowadays, I know that there are much more school buses going there, especially at the occasion of school exchanges. And so they comes, but it's always difficult to talk about that. I think one thing changed the point of view on each side is that in 2018, when the Ring of Remembrance, that is the largest um, death monument in the world, I don't know if you heard about that, it's in Lorette, just by Arras. So we have a monument with 500,000 victims linked together, and they're all German. And when this monument was decided, the question was to know if German would be included or not. And finally, Queen of England said they are all victims, so they had to be included. And this probably changed the mind and the point of view. And so when I had an experience last year, even if now I stopped to be a guide because, as you know, I'm preparing a PhD now. That last year, my older son received a girl for an exchange, and she is German. And so I suggest to her, I said, "You want to see that because." And I show her books and things. And she said, "Oh yes, of course, of course." And so we went to cemeteries, and she suddenly understood that there was a big part of her story. She is 17, but a big part of her story that she never had idea about. And she said, my parents never told me about that. And later, when my son went to visit her in Germany, she said that she has been talking with her parents about that. And they said that it was too painful for German people to talk open way about that. So, yeah, to go back to the original question, they are very discreet, and it's something really individual and private in
Mhm.
their way to go. But I think a German-speaking guide would probably have another point of view upon that.
It would be interesting. I hope to speak to a German speaking guide at some point. It is interesting that there are certain parts of our own family histories that get we are cut off from because of events or choices or actions in the family. And even though they may not be spoken about, they impact us for many generations. The void, the absence, the silence um, is, I think, as important as hearing the stories or knowing about the action. It can I think all of our families have challenging, complicated histories, and being cut off from those histories can have significant impacts on the descendants.
Yes, that's true. That's definitely true. And well, I think shame is a deeper and much more destructive feeling that runs over generations. That is really difficult to abandon, even if we said, okay, now we're in peace and we're very good friends and things like that. I think that it is definitely much more deeper and difficult to crush this off than just deciding to do it.
You're right, because I think at some level it is even impacting our cellular, our DNA. This deep shame, along with other types of emotional trauma, and it does pass from one generation to the next. And often pilgrimages, particularly ones that are tied to family history, I I think are a way to enter into an awareness of our family histories in a personal, as you say, discreet way that may be different than looking at very large battles and the actions of armies, but looking through our own individual family histories, I think is one way to come to terms with some of these complicated histories and events. You
That's true.
mentioned yeah, you mentioned that you are now doing a PhD. I'd like to hear about that.
This is another fierce fighting for me, because doing a PhD when you are a little bit more than 40 uh, could be another cathartic experience. Well, I said just before that one day you understand why you get up in the morning. And doing this PhD and these researches is another reason to get up at the morning. To situate yourself, well, I told you about my grandmother and my own history family. And in 2018, I was asked to make an exhibition about the Portuguese involvement in the Great War and what happened then. I mean, these Portuguese soldiers who married French lady, because as I told you before, I was sure that in the northern France, every families had a Portuguese ancestor. This is not something for me. It was natural because I grown up like that. And you see, well, you always make a projection of your own history on others. And when I did these researches, I quickly understood that my story was exceptional. And I was wanted to understand why it was so exceptional. And so through the exhibition, when I started to do it, I thought it would be easy to do it because plenty of French people have a Portuguese ancestor. Finally, there was no archives. There was nothing. I start doing my researches with what my grandmother told me and a phone book and making a list of Portuguese names and phoning them and say, well, I am doing some researches, and people were hanging off, thinking that I would tell them something, you see. And so I made researches, full-time researches for 6 months. And after 6 months, I found 25 Franco-Portuguese weddings, and it was so tiny. Now I am
Mhm.
about 200. Uh, but on that time, it was just 25. And these people accept to tell me about their Portuguese background. And you see, when I start interviewing people, I was used to go there with my cell phone and say, I am going to record you because it's important, as we have no archive, it's important to make archives. And if one day someone would do a PhD about Portuguese community in France, this would be very, very useful for them. So people accept. I would have, on that time, I wouldn't have any idea about the fact that I would do the PhD. It was so far from me. I had no idea about that. And so, well, I did these researches. And while my researches for this exhibition were advancing, I suddenly understood that I would taking this subject as the 10 coming years of my life. You see, because I understood that there were links together and things to search and making in relation and things like that. But I thought it would be some kind of leisure. You see, some people goes running. I go to the archives. You see, well, why not? It's another way to do sports, holding the boxes. Well, and so I start like this, like as if it would be a leisure. And but in the same time, you see, there was a little voice sitting here and talking and saying, "You must go deeper. You must find more things, and you want to understand this, so you have to see that, etc., etc." And progressively, when my grandmother turned to be older, I took the conscience of the fact that if I want this story not to be forgotten, someone had to write it, but not like a novel, like something scientist, scientifically point of view. And so it stayed in my mind, and I said, well, when one day I will be retired, I probably do some kind of university researches. And on this, COVID went. And so till COVID, I was working for the Australian company. And so I stayed there, and I loved his job. But after COVID, um, tourism was completely crashed down, and it was impossible for me to stay in this company because there was no customers at the beginning. Because you see, Australian people plan their travel 1 or 2 years before coming. So
Mm.
the company had to recreate the customers' files. And so, well, I have to do something. And you see, we are in France. We are very lucky because French government accompanied. Nowadays we have problem with that, money problems. But well, on that time they said no one will stay back and etc. So when I lost my job, I was proposed by state to restart my studies. And so I said, well, probably it could be the moment to do this famous PhD. But in
Mhm.
fact, it was not so easy because I had a graduation in art history. I had my graduation about tourism, but I have nothing about history. So I have to go back to the university to make 2 years of master's in order to start the PhD. So you see, I said, wow, we were starting everything, in fact. And so I did a first year about Portuguese photograph in the Great War, and a second year about someone I told you about, Mr. Louis L'Antoine, who was consul of Portugal in Arras. And this was in order to prepare my PhD. And so finally, at least, I started the PhD a year ago, and so the purpose of my PhD is the continuation of the exhibition I started in 2018. But the difference is that now I have about, yes, 200 weddings. I decided to stop when I'm close to 300. And then the idea of my PhD is to talk about love immigration. So there's no link with pilgrimages directly, but it's another way. And this is an original point of view upon immigration because, as you know, normally for immigration, you have tourism, politics, or money.
Mm.
And my migrants decided to stay. They never expected when they took the boat in Lisboa in 1917, they would never expect that they would marry themselves in France and living in France for all their life and becoming a French citizen. And so it's in that point of view, it's very original to have another reason of migration. And then through that, what were their lives? How would you be a good French when you were born abroad? How would you raise up your children with such an origin in France of the year 2030s, in which everything is about to restart and you have to rebuild everything, and including the economy? And what sort of future would you dream for your children? What are your relationship with your native country? Do you expect to go back there at the retirement age, or do you turn definitely the page? And in that case, what would you do with your family there? So, and an important point for me is how to be, because a lot of people I meet with Portuguese origin tells me that their parents or their grandparents taught them to be a good French. So what's a good French, first of all? And how would you be a good French with foreign origin? So it talks about migration, about integration, about tolerance, about economic too, how this Portuguese worker took part to the economy of the northern France, etc., etc. So it's very large. The war is just the departure point, and then we go further. And in this, there is something that touches me a lot, is the fact that the majority of Portuguese I found in my researches became French in 1927 because we have a specific law on that time. And so they became French, and they took part to World War II as French. Some of them were soldiers involved in the army because they had the age of that. But the majority of them were too old to join the army, and so they became resistance. How amazing it is to defend a country in which you were not born, for ideas and for a way of life that is not yours, that turns to be yours. And how would you be able to die to defend this way of life? And this is a very, very another way to show the involvement and to pay tribute to remembrance. You see, so it's
Yes.
another way, and it goes back to my involvement, and it's amazing. And I think I just started to study this, but I must find some incredible stories.
It is incredible to think that this concept of love immigration um, exists. It's a different, as you said, it's a different type of immigration, and then what it means to be to assume the identity of the new nation, in this case France, and then to then come into the era of World War II and making decisions about how to defend the country, your adopted country, during this time. There's an interesting comparative case I was thinking about as you were describing this. I grew up. I was born in the state of Wyoming in the United States, which is in the Rocky Mountain area. And during World War II, there was a POW camp. Well, there were several, but there's one or two that I'm thinking of. And German prisoners of war were brought to the United States and placed in this POW camp. And many of them at the end of the war fell in love with American women, and they stayed and they became Americans for exactly the reasons you're talking about, because they had fallen in love. They found the way of life to be agreeable or similar to how their life was in Germany. And so then they became US citizens. In this case, it's even kind of a step further because they were the enemy combatant that came in, but then they found a home within the communities of Wyoming. And I had never really thought about love integration before, but it does make me wonder if anyone has written about the account of these German soldiers, and it would be interesting to compare the two at some point. With your work, and maybe there. I don't know of any studies. It's sort of just a peripheral fact that I know about. I haven't really researched it, but it is fascinating to consider love immigration, especially at the time of war, because I think there are different dynamics that are involved when the context has to do with war and then falling in love during that time.
Yes, it's an accident migration. You don't
Mm,
plan that
yes.
sort of thing. You don't plan to fall in love, and you don't choose.
Mm,
And what this talks about is that, moreover, well, let's be romantic for a second, but that love is much more important than anything else. Probably, if we stop dreaming about love and the idealistic things, probably for Portuguese and maybe for Germans too, they had the opportunity to have a better life.
Yes.
Um, for Portuguese, with what I know, is that Portugal before World War One was like Middle Ages, you see. And in France, after the war, everything was possible for them. Of course, they had love, but they had everything. They had a job,
Mhm.
pretty well paid, and definitely better paid than Portugal. They had a political regime that was definitely more stable, because in Portugal, after just before World War One, government was staying something like 6 months and then exploding, and another one. So you have a lot of political instability. So they had the opportunity to change their life for 100%. How would you say no to that? You see? And life always have surprise for people, and this is a huge one. And one of the question I will try to answer during this PhD is to know if there is a changing of level of life. I mean, if the migration by accident is an opportunity to rise up in their career and in their children careers, you see. And in this I will be able to compare with other migrant communities like Italian, Moroccans, Algerian or Polish communities in France, that in the northern France were very big and migrate for economical reasons, to compare what works better, you see. So
Yeah.
yeah. And if you do some researches about the German in the Wyoming, I would be very, very interested to read you. Really.
Oh, I'll see if I can find there. Maybe someone has already written a book, or maybe there's some papers about this. It's an interesting part of the history that I didn't actually learn about as a child. I learned about it only maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and it's fascinating to think about prisoners of war, former prisoners of war, integrating into the society, falling in love, and then they stay, and their descendants are still there now. Um, I want to end our conversation specifically asking you about what remembrance means. You have dedicated your career to helping all kinds of tourists, but pilgrims engage in remembrance. They're at the exact places where their ancestors may have died, or the cemeteries where they're buried. You have participated in remembrance activities yourself, from being a flag bearer to other types of ceremonies. And I I I'm I would like to hear you talk about what that means for you professionally, but also personally.
This is a difficult question because it means everything, and it's difficult to answer shortly to this. Uh, I've been talking about a way of life. Uh, I think we work for something deeper and bigger than us. It's not a question of personal people. It's a question of huge, um, huge thanks. And it's in the same time a way of life, a way of thinking, a way of maintaining peace that is completely unuseful every day, but sometimes if someone do a bit, that could help to maintain and to avoid wars and death people. I speak like Miss France, you see. I hate war. This is something really idealistic, but I think that if nobody would do it, things would be worse. Um, just to it's really difficult for me to understand, to explain, because as I told you, I think it is my deep mission. I don't do that to be famous or a thing like that. I don't care. I don't care. It's I'm just a part of a chain, and I want to transmit to next generation. And it's just, yes, like a drop of water in the ocean. But one of the reasons I do this, and one of the things I have in my mind and make me thinking that I could be useful, is what sometimes people are able to do for the remembrance and to maintain it. One day, I pick up a couple in Lille, so that is the big capital here. In Lille, they were at the Carlton Hotel, so very chic, thing like that. And I picked them up at something like 7 o'clock in the morning. They were Australian, and I saw them arriving with big handbags, huge handbags. And I said, "Oh, we go for a walk. I think they've been booking battlefield tours, but it seems we are going to walk." They look like as if they would go to a big walk in your mountains, you say. And so I put the bags in my luggage, and we started the tour. And tell them, so we were on the way to Belgium, and I told them, "Where do we go first? Do we go to the cemetery to pay tribute to your ancestor now, or you prefer to see the battlegrounds and then on the way back stopping at the cemetery in Armentières?" And they said, "No, no, we want to go there now." Okay, let's go straight to Armentières. I drive, I park the car, and they asked me to have the bags. And I said, okay. So I open the car, they bring the bags, and we go to the cemetery. So I organized, I have been searching the grave, etc. So we go to the graves tray, and then suddenly they open the bag, and inside the bags there were some whiskey boxes. You see, and when I saw how numerous were the boxes that were supposed to contain bottle of whiskeys, I said, "Oh my gosh, it's 8 o'clock in the morning, and they are about to drink whiskey all the day here." And I say, "Oh, I'm driving. I'm not supposed to drink. Let's preserve myself." And so I was about to leave them, and they said, "No, no, come, come, come." Okay. And the lady gave me a paper and said, "Hold this." I start to hold the paper, and she opened the boxes. So it is the moment you stop breathing, you see. She opened the boxes, and inside there were flowers. There were fresh flowers coming straight from Australia. And when I looked down to the photo, it was the wedding photo of the guy buried there. And you see, you understand what she was about to do? She was reconstituting the wedding bouquet. What would you do with that? It's such an, and you see, for these people, what a tribute! What a deep tribute, traveling with big bags, with fresh flowers, in boxes of whiskey. It's absolutely amazing. And they remade the bouquet. And you see, this is how remembrance involvement is bigger than the tiny person we are. It's something huge. And it's an amazing souvenir for me. But imagine what it would represent for them to do that too. And I think very oftenly about these people and this amazing thing they did. And if I could be one of the rings of this change, I would consider that my life will be good. You see, and well, I'm waiting for the next generation to go ahead.
Wow. What a what a special moment to be a part of at the grave of the soldier. This is exactly the type of intimacy that you mentioned at the beginning, where you literally are joining the family for this moment, this recreation over 100 years later. It's very obvious this is a calling for you, and that the work is so much bigger, as you said, than just a moment in time. Thank you so much for taking the time today to speak with me. And it's been a beautiful conversation, and you've given me a lot to think about and new ways to research pilgrimages, and what they mean to different groups of people and different individuals.
Thank you very much. I wouldn't expect to give you this. It was not the purpose. So I'm very honored to give you this new way to think. Thank you.